Welcome to another edition of Trail Runner Nation. My name is Don Freeman.
And I'm Scott Warr, and we're excited to talk about Trail Triage. You may have noticed in the last few episodes, we've talked about this app that we were a small part in developing that's going to help runners out on a run or a race, or, you know, you could actually take it backpacking, I guess, out in the backcountry, and it helps identify some problems, common problems that you might have out there, and then some solutions that can help relieve those problems. And we have the team that created Trail Triage with us today. Don, you want to do some introductions?
Sure. I mean, I'll start with the one that started the story, which is Bob Crowley, and you've heard him on this podcast before. He's a fantastic runner and a wonderful friend of the trail, and started early on with this with a laminated card. That's where this story starts, but not where it ends. We end up needing to build, we were introduced to John Anderson. Dr. Anderson is a very accomplished trail runner, a medical doctor that serves in an emergency room department that sees all kinds of chaos and helps bring the content together. But that wasn't all, Scott. We needed to have somehow to put this program together. And so we had to go out and look for some technology. And that's where we bring in trail runner Scott Vosberg onto the team. So we have an exciting group today, and they've all contributed to this project. And we're going to hear how, and we're going to hear especially how you can get a hold of it and start using it to your advantage, whether you're a runner or a crew or just somebody that's getting into the sport that wants to learn more.
And the cool thing about this is, isn't it amazing that our community has all of these people that are specialists in their own way? And we're able to reach out. I mean, all of these guys, if you put their accomplishments, trail running accomplishments in a stack over here, and then you tried to put maybe Don and my trail running accomplishments in a stack, it would eclipse what we've done. These guys are made by trail runners for trail runners. And if you download the app and give it a shot, you'll find out why. I think we want to start off, though. This started off many, many years ago, Bob. Tell us the origin of how you developed this problem-solving flow chart and why you did it.
You bet. I was lucky enough to get into hard rock a decade ago, and it was different enough from what I had done in trail running before that I was apprehensive about the altitude and the terrain and the weather. And so I had been fast packing with a friend, Dr. Marty Hoffman. And Marty and I talked about the idea of maybe I could have something on board, like a card, that would have the most common things that could go wrong, particularly with altitude and that kind of elevation. And so he and I, through our time together on the trail, developed, this is a symptom, and then here's what you do about it. And I was particularly interested in altitude sickness and differentiating that maybe from, GI issues or other things that might seem the same. And so he was able to break it down, and I carried that card with me throughout both the hard rocks that I had the opportunity to do back to back. And it was absolutely a godsend for me, because sure enough, inevitably over, those 100 miles and all that unsettling weather and difficult terrain, I ran into some issues, but I was able to keep my cool, look at the card, diagnose for myself what was going wrong. And then the solution was right there. You either slow down or take on salt or more fluids or whatever it may be. And I felt so much more comfortable and confident in my ability to complete the race on my own than I did sort of guessing or having someone else at an aid station try to figure out what's wrong with me. And so that was the genesis of the idea, was using it for myself.
Didn't you, Bob, make photocopies of that and give it to your crew and even pacers? Was that race, or was that a follow-up race that you used that for?
I did give it to my pacers and my crew, and sure enough, it helped them, when I got more and more tired, diagnose what was going wrong with me late in the race. And in one case, I was really depleted of carbohydrates. And I was so tired that I really couldn't figure it out myself. But my pacer looked at the chart and said, he brought me over this sort of plate full of carbohydrates and said, eat that and eat that and eat that and that, which I did. And 20 minutes later, I had sprung back to life. So I really relished having that card, and I used it ever since. And since I met John over at Tour de Giants a few years later, and I was using it there as a way to, again, allow myself to take control of diagnosing what potentially could go wrong. And that list got longer and longer as you get more and more experienced. You find small things, whether it's blisters or GI issues or altitude sickness, etc. And I was able to not only help myself, but as I encountered other runners that were struggling, I was able to pull the card out and go, hey, I think this may be what's wrong with you. Let's see. And let's see if we can help you get out of your trough and get back on the trail.
Boy, what a trail community thing for you to do in that respect. But I think there's two things that come to mind as you're telling this story, Bob. One is it allowed you the confidence to go in so you didn't have to worry about that piece. Sure, there's a lot of other stuff that you got to worry about, but that's one thing that you felt confident that I have the possible issues with some solutions. And then the other thing is, and we've all been there where we had either crew or pacers that aren't quite as seasoned in trail running or these long events, and they don't know. You start throwing up on the trail and they go, what do we do? What do we do? And it's nice for them to also have that card to say, okay, he's throwing up. What do I do? Okay, this is what we need to do at the next aid station. We need to maybe start with some easy digestible things or some broth or something like that. And so I think that it's a tool that you can use in your own back pocket, but I like that you also gave it to your crew and your pacers, and it gave them the confidence that they could help you out as well.
That's right. And fast forwarding, so when I had the opportunity to lead ITRA, International Trail Running Association, based over in Switzerland for a while, John came on as our head of medical and formed a group of doctors from around the world. And we talked about the basics of this app that we're going to be talking about today. And we never implemented it there, but we kept that thought burning. And then about 2 years ago, working the aid station that Scott now leads down at mile 52.5 at the bottom of El Dorado Canyon in Western States endurance run, we saw a number of folks, first timers at Western States, but also veterans coming into that aid station struggling. They were not able to keep fluids down, or they were very lightheaded, or they were really struggling with muscle pain. And it dawned on us again, even if you're a veteran and you're tired, their ability to diagnose what was going wrong with them and to figure out how to take care of that while they were moving, while they're on the trail, it was evident. And so that sort of sealed the deal, because both Don and Scott were there, and Scott Vosberg was actually running the race that year, but that's his aid station. And so it sort of all came back around, good karma. And we called John back up and said, I think there's an opportunity with technology the way it is. And Scott, of course, is a technology developer. Maybe it's time to bring this idea once and for all, John, to fruition, and see if we can bring it such that we can give it to the community, use technology to our advantage. And instead of it being on an index card, let's make it an app and something that we can renew and update and grow over time.
There are times that a solution or a proposed solution might be the exact wrong answer. And that's what sometimes the right answer and the wrong answer could seem like the direction to go. But with this app, it allows you to see the warning signs and the go-to signs. So you're giving the correct information. And that's what John also helped bring to the table of, hey, if this is happening, whatever you do, don't do this. And those don't do's, I think, are as important as the do-do's. Well, I only saw the humor in that, but yes, but I only caught it when I was in the middle of saying it, so I couldn't take it back. I had to finish the sentence. But John, you brought great wisdom and some medical advice to everybody with the app.
Let's talk about that, John. You know, what kind of experience do you have, you know, besides being a medical doctor in an ER, and you're running? What makes you qualified? Why did we reach out to you? that was not a very good question, but you get the spirit of the question, right, John?
Yeah, well,
Please.
I think nobody else was available. Is that what Bob
That
told
was
me?
it.
No, I think, as you guys mentioned, running primarily, and I've been running my entire life from, when I was a teenager running track and cross country, and then after college getting into marathons and then ultra marathons around 20 years ago now. And then professionally, as you mentioned, I work as an emergency medicine doctor up here in Truckee. And those two things, I've been lucky enough to be able to combine some of, kind of the running and outdoor pursuits with some of the professional training that I've had, through medicine. And that, that's been in a variety of ways. Some of that's in providing, medical care at races. So initially started, volunteering at races, doing, different aspects of medical care and in a variety of different races, from kind of the typical ultras here in the States to some international, more stage, week-long stage races and things like that. And then over the last 8 years, I believe, helping start the Broken Arrow Sky Race up here in Tahoe, and being the medical director and coordinating all the medical for that. So I've had kind of a insight from both sides of the coin. Being a runner, and frankly experiencing pretty much every single one of these issues at one time or another, to seeing other runners or racers or whatnot experiencing some of these issues and figuring out how to help them out. And and so I think that's kind of the kind of the primary application of both of those things kind of coming together and providing medical care at these things. And then I also work in doing like wilderness medicine education and teaching and things like that. And I think one of the unique things about most ultra races is they have this component of endurance medicine, like you would see it like a big, Boston Marathon, something like that. But then you take them and you throw them out in the middle of the woods. And so you've got this component of wilderness or austere medicine where you've got to combine kind of the thinking and the strategies and the problems that you get from wilderness medicine with these more traditional races, and trying to come up with solutions looking at both of those areas.
Let me ask this question. This question is going to be directed to Dr. Anderson and to Bob Crowley, but I'm going to make sure that Scott Vosberg's mic is working. How many tabs are on this app? Different conditions.
Well, I can tell you that.
That's 13. Why I'm asking. 13 conditions. And now so we know his mic's working. So John, Bob, how did you come up with these 13? Why isn't there 8 or 50? How did you come up with the number, or the conditions rather?
Well, I think when Marty and I made the index cards, there were probably 8 or 9,
mm-hmm.
and I used about 7 of them during the race.
In one race. Yeah. Did you get that, everybody? He used 7 of them in one race.
And realized, through more the last decade, there are other things that I was encountering from time to time. So I just added them to the list. I just kept the list. And I think when John and I initially spoke over Itra, there may have been upwards of 15 or 20, I think, John. And we thought it was a little too much. The balance here is trying to find something that is useful to you while you're in an event or training. So you're on the move, right? So you're not going to stand there and then read a dissertation about, GI issues. You have to get a quick diagnosis of yourself and then try to fix it and move on. And so I think what we tried to do, at least with this initial release, or find 13, 12 or 13 of the most common things, the 90-10 rule, and then leave the door open for adding future tabs in future releases as those come up. Does that sound about right, John?
Yeah, I think so. I think, finding the common problems and then kind of parsing those out into things that are common and nuisances, and then and then looking more at things that can be more serious. So it's kind of some of the topics, for example, like blisters or chafing, those aren't inherently dangerous, but they're fairly common, right? And they can ruin your race, versus some of the other topics where where we really wanted to address, this can be a life-saving intervention. So something like heat illness or altitude or something like that, where some of those can be quite common, but in their most severe forms may be less common, but certainly can have a large impact as well. And so trying to combine those two areas of both the common things as that are nuisance, as well as the things that can be more serious.
I think Bob brought up something that I made a note of here, and I think we need to bring up is it can be easy if you have internet access. You go into an aid station and you can say Google GI distress and get just thousands of responses on what GI distress is and some of the solutions, but it's going to take you a long time to go through and read those and really kind of that doesn't apply to me now because of this reason or that reason. And so the thing that is interesting that Bob brought up is it does identify some of the symptoms, so you can identify what the problem is, but then it has a very short list of things that you can do to hopefully solve that issue that you can read on your phone in a very quick amount of time. And then it has more info. You can click on that. And currently, if you have internet access, if you click on the more info button, it will take you to a website that we've created that has more information. It has videos for taping for blisters, for example. It has more information. But I think that the challenge that we had as we were developing this is how do we make it simplistic and usable on the trail? We don't want to have a full dissertation, paragraphs of things. We want to make it very simple. Let's get to the solution as quickly as we can. So well done, team.
That's an excellent point, Scott. There's so much information available to us today. That's the pro, and that's the con as well. What we've tried to do is use the best medical resources we have available to us, and as John described, that are both from the practice side of medicine in the field and wilderness, but also from a runner's perspective. And that's where we narrowed the list of people that have worked with John to pool and come up with what is the current consensus on how to diagnose and hopefully fix the problem you have. And a number of these things have changed even since the time that I created those index cards with Marty. A number of the solutions and actually the diagnosis has changed. And that's why having an app is important, because as time goes on and information becomes available, research is conducted, we'll be able to update this and keep it current, and also give the runners the confidence that they're getting information here that is coming from the experts. So we're not trying to solve the world problem. We're just trying to make sure that the runner, if they're in distress or they have an annoyance or both, they have a quick solution that they can count on that's going to probably have an 85% chance of fixing the problem. That's what we're trying to get at. It's not perfect. It's not going to solve everybody's problem, but if we can get 8 out of 9 runners or 8 out of 10 runners back on the trail and finish whatever the goal is that they have, versus being taken out by some sort of ailment or putting themselves in harm's way or in risk, that would be a great contribution to the community, and also to the aid station personnel and to the crew and to the pacers who are also paying attention to that runner.
So this question for Scott Vosberg, our technical expert and creator of the app. Did Scott Ward, did he mention you can use this offline if you're in the middle of a canyon somewhere? Can you pull out your phone and toggle for some information?
Oh yeah, you can absolutely use it offline in the wilderness. Just Bob was just mentioning, we've got you click on it on the issue. Up comes a little short little symptom solutions, what to avoid. But the more info part that Scott War mentioned was that goes actually back out to a website. So unless you're bringing a Starlink with you while you're running, you're not going to be able to get to that. So I think a future enhancement would be to bring all that stuff into the app. That's to happen.
And I just lost my question. Dang it!
Well,
That
that's
was
okay.
a good one.
Let me just go back to what Bob Crowley was saying.
Is there a tab for that? Is there a tab for his problem?
Can bring that. So Bob paced me. So in 2016 at Western States, you remember that, Bob?
I do.
And I'm trying to remember that things were going really terribly for me at that point. Things were happening that had never happened to me on a race before. And I pick up Bob in Forest Hill, and he's like, tell me what's going on, right? And we didn't have the app then to sort of scroll down and see what the solutions were. But Bob went right into app mode, right? He went right into that card mode. And tell me, did you have that card with you while we were on the trail in 2016 on Western States? Because I vaguely remember that, but being so kind of sort of out of it. Do you remember that, Bob?
I do. Yeah. And it had helped. Scott was really having a rough time, a couple of issues. We won't get into what they were, but but the good news is Scott pushed through all of it, and it was not easy. I felt horrible for him. He had 38 miles to go, and it was a very, very unfriendly Western States for him. But he finished. He got through fairly uninjured, and went on to run a few more times.
Yeah.
I want to state a real life example of how this app helps someone. A couple weekends ago, we hosted here in Auburn the Canyons, 100K, 100 miler. I think there was a 50K. And we were, when I say we, Bob, Scott Vosberg, and myself were at an aid station, mile 78 and mile 90, I believe. They had to come through our aid station twice. And one guy came through mile 78. It was, and he was not looking good. He was having GI problems for sure. He was just nothing on the buffet table looked good. And he just was not in a good place. And I remembered something that I've never used that was in the app. Thank you, John Anderson, because I read this about a week before, because we had a podcast on GI distress. And in the app, one of the solutions was to take an alcohol wipe and put it underneath your nose and smell the alcohol wipe. Well, this guy was not feeling well. And I asked him, I said, what about a ginger chew? And he goes, I've been eating ginger for 20 miles. I can't eat another ginger chew. And so I went over to the medical tent and I said, you have an alcohol wipe? And the medical officer there gave me an alcohol wipe. And I took it over to the guy and I said, this will cure your problem. Now, did I know it was 100% sure? I don't know, but that's what you tell a runner, right? If you're at an aid station, you tell them stuff to kind of help them mentally too. But I said, I've heard that this really takes care of GI distress. And so he took that thing and he put it underneath his nose and sniffed it for a while. And then I let him sit there for a while by himself. And every few minutes he'd put that thing underneath his nose and smell it again and smell it again. And eventually he was able to get up and get out of the aid station. Now, I was telling this story to Don. I think it may have been this morning on a run. And he goes, it may have been the alcohol wipe. It may have also been that he sat down for a while, for 10 minutes. But either way, my point is that there was another solution that I wasn't aware of. And that's to Bob's point. It's something on an app's format, we can update it. And so I've never tried an alcohol wipe when I have GA distress, and it's something I'm going to try in the future.
Dr. Anderson, since we have you here, does that really work, or was Scott just blowing smoke?
Yeah, no, it actually has been studied, and I think maybe I'll take this chance to kind of talk a little bit about how we got some of the information that's in
Right.
the app, right? So, one of the neat things about ultra running is that there's a good community with a lot of collective wisdom. But one of the challenges is that we've had so much growth, and there's a lot of people that have come into the sport that maybe don't have anybody to get that collective wisdom from. So when we're, developing the app and developing the topics, some of these topics are well studied in like the medical literature. So there's published data, there's published studies. So the alcohol wipes, for example, while it is not a trail running or an ultra running study, they've looked at this in the hospital where they've given, IV medications for anti-nausea or antiemetics versus using alcohol wipes and then studied kind of how they perform. And the alcohol wipes perform quite well in that. So then we kind of take that data and extrapolate it to, use on the trail and things like that. And I think that the topics in general tend to be a bit of a combination of, again, this collective wisdom and the existing data that's out there. So, there's certain things like blisters, for example. Well, there are some studies on blisters and some different methods and techniques, but by and large, most of the blister treatment is kind of based on expert opinion and experience. So you have, people that, this is their thing. Like they love feet and they will fix feet for, days at a time, every race, and they have, they're very good at it and they've seen what works and what doesn't work. And again, there's some studies on this, but in getting to the recommendations for things like blisters, it was kind of pooling information from a variety of expert opinion, looking at the available data, and then coming up with a kind of with a cogent recommendation. Uh, with some of the other topics, so things like heat illness. So heat illness, is well studied. There's a lot of data on it, in the medical literature. A lot of different studies about, diagnosis, treatment, things of that nature. And so we can use that information, mostly from medical journals or medical textbooks and things like that. And then again, combine kind of expert recommendations with that. But really, when we're looking, for example, we're looking at like medical literature, the highest level of evidence are well done studies, and then kind of moving on down, expert opinion somewhere in the middle, and then kind of anecdotal is down towards the bottom. And so we want to try to have as much of that high level data as we can. And it doesn't exist for some of these topics, but there is a lot of, again, that collective wisdom that we can then kind of make some recommendations on. So essentially, when we're writing the kind of the solutions or recommendations for these topics, I look at all the data, taking into account like the personal experience and race protocols and things that we developed over the years. Look at all the data, bring that all together, try to get some outside recommendations, and then kind of send it out to a group of different people who either have a lot of personal experience in ultra and trail running, or professional, kind of medical experience in the same sort of realm, and kind of get their input on it, and then try to synthesize all of that together to come up with what we have. And then again, as you, I think, maybe mentioned it at one point, when the app was first submitted to Apple or whatnot, Scott, you would know this better than I would. They said, well, we actually need to see your citations and your data. And that part was actually pretty easy because they had this huge list of citations to collect all the data. We just had to organize them and submit it back to the app to get approval for that.
So John, and this question is going to come to you in a different format, Scott Fosberg. So get ready. When you went out to the mailbox and you opened it up and you saw this package and it was all these laminated cards with all these conditions on it, and you said, that's curious. I wonder why I have that. Followed up with a phone call that said, hey, we've got a project that we're thinking about and wondering if you'd like to participate. And everybody else took one step back and you were the guy standing in the line going, what did I just volunteer for? Did you realize how much work was involved in putting this together? Because I was on the outside looking in thinking, my goodness, does John even know what he got himself into when he said yes to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I knew the in my head, kind of had an idea of the amount of work that it would take to make it worthwhile and to make a quality product. And honestly, Bob and I had talked about this sort of thing, for a few years. And so it's always kind of brewing in the back of your head. And honestly, from from a medical director perspective here, ultimately this makes my job a whole lot easier. Like whenever I'm coordinating all my medical volunteers for races or whatnot, and we always have wonderful volunteers, doctors, nurses, EMTs, medics, people like that. And some of them don't necessarily practice medicine on a daily basis, but are more in the wilderness first responder, search and rescue sort of realm. And they'll always come to me and they're like, "Oh man, I hope we get to see some action today, X, Y, and Z." And my response is, I hope I sit on my butt all day and I'm just bored with any of that sort of stuff. And ultimately, I think this app hopefully will provide that opportunity for me to be more bored, because we're kind of empowering the runners and the crew and just aid station workers to look and say, hey, we have some solutions here before this turns into a big problem, or we don't need to contact the medical staff because my runner's having cramps. We can figure out what to do and what not to do with this. So the short answer is yes. I think I realized that it was going to be a good bit of work, but with the caveat that in the long run, I think it'll actually decrease the amount of work that I have to do.
I think we've all experienced on a major run. So we're preparing for months for whatever the event is, and then you get into the event, and inevitably something happens to you that you didn't ever have happened before. And you're bewildered. You're like, this never happens during training runs. I never have a problem with this, or whether it's breathing issues or nausea or chafing or blister. All of a sudden it's happened, and now you're not prepared because you haven't practiced it, you haven't experienced it, and you don't know what to do, and you sort of panic, and now you're all wound up, and you got yourself kind of wrapped around the axle, worried about something, and you don't know how to fix it. What we challenge Scott Vosburg to do is to take those a dozen things that inevitably could happen and make it as simple as possible to allow you to stop and go, okay, on board, blisters. I've never had a blister in my life. Well, now all of a sudden I've got one that is absolutely feels like I have a crater under my foot. What do I do? What exactly do I do? Take the 2 or 3 minutes, you read it really fast. That's the challenge to Scott, and then fix it, or at least get you to the aid station where then you can deal with the podiatrist that might be there and say, this is what I have. This is what I did to at least triage, ergo trail triage, to get me to you. Can you give me a better solution or a longer lasting solution? So again, Scott was really thrown a bit of a curveball, because we said it'd be great to use his technology skills, which he's incredibly good at. But we also said, take something really complex that John's going to deliver us and boil it down to something really simple and useful. And Scott, I don't know how you did that.
Well, it's definitely a team effort. I mean, and can't leave out Katie, who produced all the graphics for us, right? And I think that's part of what made it simpler. You don't have to read, all the details. You can see a big picture of somebody, vomiting, and that's what I'm feeling like right now. I'm going to click on that button. And so I think that the graphics that were provided for us to use really kind of set the tone for how this app's, going to play out. And just some of the stuff that John wrote, there's actually some pretty funny things in there, like under the animal encounters. How do you know because a bear's chewing on your leg. Those sort of comments are really, really awesome, and it's worth reading through all of them just to see those. But yeah, when Bob, I forget, I think I first talked to you about doing this, it was like, wow, this really sounded fun. And it didn't sound, when we talked about it, it didn't sound too hard to do, right? Just a couple boxes on a mobile screen, and then some verbiage that was going to be provided to us. But then you realize, well, you got to make all the graphics. You got to have how are you going to authenticate this? How are you going to put this on? Is it going to be on the Apple platform, or is it going to be on Android? Both, and what programming language are you going to use, and the database, how are you going to store the information? So it was all started to go like, well, this is, the simpler something is, sometimes the more complicated it actually is in the background. So, and I had never done anything for an Android platform before. So it seemed like kind of a neat thing to try to, oh, this would be a great little passion project on the side, and a new thing to do. And so as it turned out, it took a little bit longer than we all had anticipated, for various reasons, but we got it across the finish line recently. And in fact, I believe it was announced at the AR50 race a couple weeks back.
Yep.
And then that was just the Apple platform, and we recently got it across the finish line for Android. So here's the announcement today: it's now available for Android. So go out there and download it and give it a try, and maybe that'll double our users now.
And then, when Scott and Don were at Scott Vosberg, now is the captain of El Dorado Creek, and witnessing all these runners coming in various degrees of distress and a variety of problems, they quickly came back on a future run that we did together and said, John and I said, we got to make this available to as broad an audience as possible, hopefully on an international basis. These problems have no barriers. And it ought to be something that hopefully we can contribute, so give to the community as a way to advance the community, grow it, give people more confidence to get out there and do their trail running. And we needed a platform to get the word out. And Scott and Don immediately said, we're in. And of course, they won't brag about it, but I will. They've had the #1 running podcast in running for a decade. The statistics just came out last week on Spotify, and on a scale of 2 to 1, there are more listeners to Trail Runner Nation than any other podcast in the world. And so what better platform to get the word out than Trail Runner Nation?
Well, thank you, Bob. I want to get back to a question that I learned through this whole process from Scott Vosberg, and that is, you can't just put together a bunch of crappy information and publish it, and Apple says, okay, you now have an app. I mean, they have some rigorous requirements. Tell us a little bit about that process, Scott, and how we had to go back to John and say, okay, John,
your work's
you
not
need to
done.
give us a bibliography now.
No, it's true. I mean, you supply the app to, you send it to the overlords at Apple, and they go, well, you got to make sure that this is, quality product, that it meets our standards, and you can put it on the App Store. And so they did that. I had to answer a ton of questions, but it took me more than one sitting to get through them. And then I submitted it, and they go, okay, well, you're providing, medical advice. You're providing sort of this. I'm like, oh, well, yeah. So, well, you need to have, references and resource, how did you get, and so we went back to John, and John provided all that. So we came back and put that in there. And then, also, it's, and this is something we learned, that, you can go out to the internet from your app. So you can't rate this. You have to rate this at 17, plus, I'm like, oh, well, we didn't mean that. So, there's some things that we learned about, putting stuff up in the App Store. But you know what? That turned out to be a good thing for us, because it made it better, right? It made it a more quality. It vetted it. It's now on the App Store, so it's passed some of their standards.
Yeah, I've got a question, and I'm not going to disclose that I'm an Apple user, but did you have the same type of criteria or credentialing for the Android app?
Yeah, it was pretty similar, but I felt that once we got through the process with Apple, that the doing it for the Google Play Store would have been as much simpler, and it ended up being that way. So they have the same sort of standards.
So once again, Apple was first, and Android followed our suit and got it done. Okay.
Well, at least from our perspective.
But you're not gonna, you're not going to say that you have a preference, Don.
No, I don't. Obvious. That's obvious. If you replay what I said, you'll have a hard time digging that out. You're right.
So we have this app now. It's available. Bob alluded to it. It's a gift back to the community. This is information, from the genesis of Trail Runner Nation. We thought, through a podcast, how can we disseminate information from people that have come before, that have the expertise and the experience. And when Don and I heard about this, we thought this absolutely meets our why of why we do the podcast. Is this is a tool that we can give to the community, whether they're seasoned veterans, whether they're newbies, whether they're just a weekend warrior that's pacing or crewing. It's something that we can give back that can help them enjoy the trails and become better runners. And I think that we all agreed when we started this project, there will never be a price tag to this. There is a cost to it, but we will burden those costs because we want to make sure that this app is free for everybody. And that's probably, I'm proud about this app. Not that I was key in any of the development, but I'm very proud to have my name associated with it, not because it's just great content, but because we want to give it away and not try to monetize it. So well done.
One feature we didn't mention was one of the tiles is a user feedback, right? So if the
tell
community
us.
wants to, give us some ideas or give us some feedback on what they're reading, or give us, some ideas on the content, we'd love to hear from you. So, click on that button and connect to us and write something to Scott.
If you're a user researcher, if you have that degree and you have a lot of experience in user research, we'd love to hear from you. I dabble a little bit in that realm, and user researchers are gold to me because they look at things a little bit differently than engineers look at them. And they say, yeah, that's good information, but can you get to it in 1 click versus 2 clicks? Or can you use, this graphic or this color to emphasize? And I think that, if there's somebody out there that has a user experience background, fill out that feedback form. We'd love to hear from you.
And I think, the trails are free, and so is this app. And it should be that way. And hopefully in the future, this will be a platform that John and the medical folks in our community around the world can use as we expand. So if there's research coming forward, if there's new techniques that are being developed, this provides a single platform, no matter what preference you have on platform around the world, and in the future, hopefully we'll have it translated as well. So that as that information comes available, we can add it to the app. And if the majority of trail runners just carry this free app, which takes up little to no space on their mobile device, then they can be assured with future updates that they're getting the most current medical information to help them and their colleagues and their runners do the best they possibly can. And that's the simple part of it, is we want to keep it just that simple, and hopefully provide future growth in a way that people can rely on the information, but also it's really easy to get to.
And as updates come, as suggestions are submitted, we're committed to making sure that Dr. Anderson continues to work hard, and we'll make sure all that information is vetted, that it's to the same high standards that he has for everything else. We're just not going to fill it up with junk just because we made it past the gatekeeper at Android or Apple, where it's always going to be good.
I heard that if you spray Windex on your poison oak, it just magically disappears.
With an
Can you vet
wipe.
that for me, John?
Yeah, that's the sort of information that we're going to avoid. That's in the don't do this section. So maybe we'll have a whole separate tab of folklore that.
That sounds great. That's a great idea, Dr. Anderson.
That is not. But it is, I mean, you mentioned that, we say a little bit tongue in cheek, but it really is, when you look at some of these problems, there are things that, are potentially commonly recommended that really are the wrong thing to do. And in a perfect example, and I think it's been, more and more well known, over the last 5 to 10 years with regard to hydration and things like that. Because, it used to be, 15, 20 years ago, it's like, pretty much for any problem, it was just drink some more, right? It was like, oh, you're feeling tired, you're feeling
Yeah.
dizzy, you must be dehydrated, you're having cramps, you must be dehydrated, drink some more water. And obviously what we found is that's the wrong thing to do. Sometimes it might be the right thing to do, but you have to, consider what are these other factors. Am I actually, low on my sodium and hyponatremic, and drinking more water is just going to make things worse. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that, as the, past recommendations or past kind of common recommendation or folklore, is out there, we're always learning a bit more and learning a bit more that's backed in science, and again, potentially avoiding, creating more problems than we're already there.
As I was, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, just as an example to John's point, my very first Western States, I was carried out in the back of a pickup truck at Last Chance, 10 pounds overweight. And I had an IV in each arm as they took me out. I was hyponadremic, but at the time, no one really knew what that was. This is back in the early 90s. And so the solution was my pulse was dropping and I looked dehydrated, which of course are classic symptoms, but I was hyponadremic. I had 10 pounds more weight of water sitting in my stomach and working its way into my kidneys and sort of with poison. And so we just added more fluid. And it wasn't until we got to the emergency room that they gave me adrenaline. And I had to ask for extra bedpans once it started flowing. Now, that would never happen today. And of course, I'm not, in no way am I knocking the medical support at the time. They didn't know. But these things have changed. And that's why it's important to have an app, so that as more research becomes available, and John and his team of global doctors really are on point on many of these things. And there is a tremendous amount of information coming forward. He has the medical conference coming up here in the next few weeks, which they do every year around the time of Broken Arrow and Western States. It's a full day, and all the latest research comes pouring in, and all the people from around the world. And so that information, as it's been vetted and proven, it'll make its way into this app. And it's really important to us that we stay current, because the good news is more and more attention is being paid to our sport and what we're doing, and more information is becoming available to help us finish our races and stay out of harm's way. And it's really critical that we stay on top of that. And the app needs to reflect that, of course, as time goes on.
John, did some of your doctor colleagues contribute and help and look at some of the data that you were moving towards Scott Vosberg's app?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think generating all of the kind of initial information was mostly a personal endeavor, I guess, in coming up with, and I would write these topics, synthesizing, the information and whatnot. And then I would send usually what I had from the topic to, it kind of depended. There's a, I have some great friends and great connections from working some of these races all over. People like Andy Pasternak, he's the medical director for Western States now. He also happens to live close by and that sort of stuff. People like him, people like Avi Patel, who's the medical director for Racing the Planet for a while. Stanford guy, folks like that. And then as well as there are some group kind of listservs, and I was a little more, with that, I would not necessarily just kind of blast things out, but looking for a little more targeted feedback on certain things. And then some of it too is, just talking with folks who that have had some experience either with certain issues, or have done a lot of medical care, at certain races, or have experienced, again, some of these things themselves.
So go ahead, Scott.
Did you have something on the topic?
No, 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 you go.
Okay. One of the things, as I was proofreading this at the earlier stages, and Don and I have talked about this. In fact, we talked about it, I think, this morning, is one of the common threads for all 13 of these issues that's, I think, on the majority of them is slow down. And I think that that's interesting to say with some of these. Now, if you're being attacked by a bear, slow down was not one of the solutions. But in many cases, slow down was the case. I mean, a lot of these situations present themselves because you're pushing your body, and your body is saying, yeah, I don't want you to do this, so I'm going to cause issues so that if you don't slow down, I'm going to stop you from running or walking, right? Scott, do you have something?
Yeah, we've been talking about these 13 issues, but I don't think we've ever said what 13 they were. And so,
Oh yeah, please.
So I've got the app on my screen right there for anyone who's watching this part. But let me just read through them. First is blisters, muscle cramps, nausea and vomiting, breathing, bleeding, overheating, chafing, diarrhea, confusion, lightheadedness and dizziness, altitude, animal encounters, that's the bear attacks, and tendinopathy. So those are the 13 that we're out the gate with. And in the past couple weeks, since it was first announced and people have been downloading and using it, we've collected some interesting data on what are the most common ones people are looking at. So I'd put it to you guys as a little trivia question here: which do you think is the most common of these tiles that folks have been clicking on?
Oh, well, let's start with Dr. Anderson. What do you suspect? You're the medical expert on the team here.
Well, I do have some inside knowledge on this.
Good.
And I will say that I think when I talked with Scott about this, one of the topics was not surprising and would have been my guess, and that would have been in the gastrointestinal, so the nausea, vomiting, and then I think the other topic that had been mentioned was tendinopathies, which was a bit more surprising. But I think
1 and 2 you nailed it. What's number 3?
Well, you told me those. Cramps would be my guess for third, but I don't know.
Well, recently cramps got passed over by blisters.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I was going to say blisters.
Blisters is now number 3, and muscle cramps is number 4. So,
well, as the seasons change, as it heats up, we're going to see one of them bump up. We're going to see heat exhaustion in there, and
we need to get poison oak in there so we can see when that bumps up in the springtime.
Yeah, and I think I was thinking about that when you had mentioned that those were the topics. And again, the nausea, vomiting one makes sense because that is that and blisters, things like that but nausea, vomiting is really one of the most common things you see at these races. But when you mentioned tendinopathy, I was just kind of thinking about the timing of the year, and it seems that races are really just kind of gearing up now. So a lot of people are still kind of in training mode. And I think that highlights again another use for the app is that this is to be used on your long training runs, your daily training runs, things like that, when you may not, you may be going out for a 20 or 30 mile run and there's no aid station. So you're by yourself. So there's nobody else to like help you sort through things, manage your blister, manage your vomiting or anything like that. But when I was hearing that about tendinopathy, well, that's kind of a training thing. I mean, it happens in races, but when you're training, you're like, oh, my Achilles hurts. What's going on here, and what do I need to do to help this out? And that may be just a time of year thing.
Yeah, I wanted to throw this out to the group, and you brought it up, John. Is how do you envision this app being used? And John, you mentioned, the old saying, you don't try anything new on race day, right? So I'll kind of give that as a hint. Let's go kind of around the horn here. Don, how do you see people using this app?
Well, I'm going to go where you didn't think I was going to go, Scott, because I think it's going to end up in the hands of cyclists, backpackers, people that row. I mean, people that are doing endurance events that are working against gravity are going to find application for that. And that's what's exciting to me. Although it says trail triage, I think the trail can be defined as a waterway or anything else. So I think it's going to be used a lot.
How about you, Bob?
Yeah, I agree with Don. I think that another application is, and something I do, and now I'll have the app to help me organize it, is when I go out for a long training run, like John was talking about, or the event, I'll pack a little triage kit. So there's items in there for dealing with blisters or with gastro issues that I've had before. And it's great to have a little fast kit, not very heavy, but it has all the things that really complement what the app is telling you to do on board, so that if I'm out alone, I can diagnose the problem, and then hopefully using my little triage kit, solve the problem on my own, which can make for a much better result in the training run than if you're out there and you have absolutely nothing. So that's another area where I think people will hopefully use it as a complement to get them prepared as they're training to have on board the kinds of things that they can do to fix their problem.
Bob, did I just hear you submit a request for a triage kit that John helps design that we need, that Scott can put it as a tile? Did I hear that hint?
I think it was implicit, wasn't it, John?
All right.
John, what about you? How do you see people using this app?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with all that's been said, and I think I probably see it primarily used, in three sets of hands, I guess. The first and probably the most obvious is in the runner's hands themselves, and again, I think that's maybe some in races, but I think a lot of it is in those training and those build up to races, to be able to figure out, because you get blisters when you're training, you get cramping when you're training, all those sorts of things, to kind of, again, kind of build your own knowledge base, and to be able to then come up with solutions. And then the second application, and we've mentioned it a couple of times, is in the hands of crew members. In when you've got a runner who is having one of these, how do I best? Because I mean, I don't know, when you guys have had crew in the past, sometimes it's people that have experience in ultra running and things like that, and a lot of us probably have small circles of friends, so they tend to do these things over again. But other times it can be, it's family members or friends who don't, they're seeing this for the first time, and they're like, oh my God, what is this? What is this thing? All these people running around, eating potato chips, whatnot. And so I think it can be helpful in the crew setting when your runner comes into you in an aid station, to click on it, look at something, and be like, okay, I can help out with this. I've got some places to start to deal with this. And then finally, for race organizations themselves, either in the hands of the aid station volunteers or the medical volunteers. And it's really, it's really written from, hopefully, to be utilized by everyone. Not, you don't have to have medical training or medical knowledge to be able to read the app and use it. But I think the information in there is easily used, by medical professionals as well.
So what you're advocating is, if someone is out there training, they should have the app. Mm-hmm. But as you're going into a race and putting together your spreadsheet of to-dos, like Don always does, one of those is have your crew and pacers download the app and be familiar with it, so that they can use it as well. Scott Vosberg, you've run a lot of races. How do you see runners using this app?
Yeah, no, first of all, I totally agree with what Bob and John were saying, runners, crew, aid station volunteers, training. So I'm just going to throw in there pacers on race day, maybe just be kind of your digital pacer. Sometimes you're late, deep into a race, and the problems are popping up, and it's happened to all of us. And normally, in the light of day, and only with a few miles on your feet, you could probably troubleshoot it no problem. But you need maybe a little extra help, so you can look at this, and even nothing new. Maybe it's just a reminder to say, oh yeah, I have got to slow down, like you were saying, Scott, or something like that. So it could be just your digital pacer out there keeping you company and giving you just that little bit of extra confidence when you're late into a race.
Well, I will tell you that just this past weekend, there was a marathon in Huntington Beach, and one of my good friend's daughters was running her first marathon, and she kept texting me, what should I eat the night before? She just had all these questions, and I finally sent her the link to Trail Triage. I sent the link to my buddy who was going to be crewing her, and her husband who was also going to be crewing her. And she finished successfully. And my friend texted me back, and he goes, that was very handy to have, because it helped me when she came in and she wasn't feeling really that good, I could say, hey, Annie, you need to do this, you need to do that. So I think there's a lot of utility here. You guys have done a very, very good job. I'm looking forward to the updates. I'm super excited. The Android version is available now. Future updates.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, how lucky are we to get to be part of this and the expertise that Bob Crowley pulled Dr. Anderson and pulled Scott Vosberg in and really put the team together. And here we are getting to talk about it, and it's posted on our site. We're just fortunate for all the generosity of the talent and the passion that they share for the sport as well.
Dumb luck. That's what I put. Dumb luck.
It's always good. Bob, I have one final question to you. Do you still carry your laminated cards on a race?
Not anymore. Just my iPhone.
And make sure your battery's charged.
Yeah.
That's the only caveat.
Yeah.
You got to have a charged battery. It doesn't pop up when the battery's drained.
Well, in John's new Trail Triage kit, he recommends extra battery bars. I know you have to pay
John,
a little extra for that, but
a second hint.
We'll get to work on that.
We want to thank John Anderson, Scott Vosberg, and Bob Crowley for being the team to put this together. So we are very, very appreciative as a community and give thanks to you.
Yeah, and thank you both for being the platform for all this. And it's been a couple of years of actually pulling this all together. A lot of patience went into this, and now that it's here, don't forget to remind people how to find the app. And but thank you both. For being opening your platform, which you've worked over a decade and a half to build and get the word out to all the trail runners around the world.
Scott Vosberg, how would we find this, and where would we go if we wanted to become part of the Triage family?
Well, if you have an Apple, open up the App Store, search for Trail Triage. It'll come right up. And same thing on the Android. Just go to Google Play and Trail Triage. Super simple.
There's also a website, trailtriage.com. Don't be surprised, though, when you type that in, it gets redirected to Trail Runner Nation. But there's a web page there that has the links as well. And Don,
what?
In case you forgot all of that, because I know you're an avid reader of the podcast show notes.
Oh, certainly.
The link will be in there. So I know Don, he just doesn't miss an episode of the show notes, and that's really where he gets all his information.
It is. Thanks for the reminder, Scott.
The Wizard of Oz behind all this is Ryan.
That's right.
Yep. Thank you, Ryan, for making this 2-hour podcast condensed into 1 hour. I don't know how he does it. There's just a lot of stuff that we talk about that he just edits out and makes us sound good. Hey, make sure you go download the app, and more importantly, get your shoes, tie them nice and tight, and go out and run.
Mas.